All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Um, Hopefully everyone is doing well and you all had a good Thanksgiving weekend. I, for one, came down with the flu, so I'm still a bit under the weather. Let me know if I'm not speaking loud enough, or if you get a bit of a delayed or confused response from me. It's probably the virus talking, but I'll do my best and we'll get through this together. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Eric Winterville-Luce. I am the technical project manager for the instructional scheduling assistant. I am based in the School of Biological Sciences along with the ISA development team. And then we work on a regular basis with the ISA work group, who generally has a representative from every school within the university, though we are looking for a few representatives. Um, Today, we're really going to just focus on what has changed, what's different, and some things to know as all of you are heading into starting to doing scheduling in TSS. This is probably going to be the first of a number of trainings that we do as we release more features to support, or feature updates, I should say, to support how TSS does things differently than ISIS. I will do my best to answer TSS questions, but I am not by any means a TSS expert. I am mostly aware of the things that we have needed to become aware of in order to make sure that the ISA can work with TSS. So I'm going to dive right in. I'm going to primarily be working out of our QA environment, but I may occasionally hop into our production environment, or I may have one of our work group members share their screen so that we can do production whenever that's helpful. I hope to leave about 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. But we can, feel free to ask questions along the way. I just do want to make sure we get through all the major changes. Um, so we have a running document on the list of changes that we're aware of. I'll be bouncing back and forth between this and the ISA. Um, Here's what the annual schedule builder will look like in our TSS terms. This update was released on Tuesday. You got release notes about it on Wednesday. The main change you'll see is a change in course numbering. This one's pretty easy. What we understand is subject code and course number have now been combined into, I guess, a module name. Courses are called modules in TSS, but we can continue calling them courses. That's not going to change anything. The other main thing you'll see is a change in what we call section code. And I'm going to go into depth on that because understanding those differences will be helpful. Um, for our perspective, is it's actually a little bit easier to follow than the letter prefix codes that we have currently. It gives you more information up front, but I want to make sure everyone understands it. But as you can see here, I have a test term set up for anthropology in our QA environment. All I did was I copied schedule from one of our ISIS terms to our TSS term in order to get this data into our QA environment. And it all looks fairly similar, with the exception of those two things, course and section code. And we'll talk about that. So as we already talked about, section code is the main place where things are changing. I've got a little map here, and let me know if this is too small. I can make it a little bit bigger. That shows what something is in ISIS and what its equivalent will be in TSS. So here in my example, math 18 now changes to math hyphen leading 0, 018. If this happened to be like math 18A, it would be math hyphen 018A, all run together as a single string. And then this idea of the primary section. So we're used to the primary component. So if you have a lecture, that's always going to be the primary component. The course number, or the section code numbering for that, there's two different ways that can be represented in TSS. We're really only going to be looking at this short way. in the ISA, but it's helpful to understand both. So there's the math hyphen 018 hyphen LE. So this is a combination of the course and the instruction type. And then this next part, there's two numbers here. The first one is the offering number. So in our A, B, C, D, E, F through Z, that corresponds to 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. It's just the offering number, except instead of being represented by a letter, it's now represented by a number. Instead of being limited to 26, it can now go up to 999. Please don't offer that many in one term. That's not going to help anyone. Then in most cases, the second number is I would call it an iterative number or an increment number of that specific instruction type. But there's an exception made for this primary component. So in this case, because the lecture is the primary component, it gets a 000. We're used to seeing this in ISIS as A00. So the primary component here is still 0. It's just all zeros. The main change happens when we start getting into our secondary and tertiary and quaternary components. So here I've got a discussion section. So in ISIS, it would be A01 is my first discussion section. This is all going to look really similar to what we saw above. First offering, right? Because that's the A offering or the first offering is still 001. The first increment of the discussion is 001, and so on, 2, 3, 4, etc. Here's where we see things looking again very similar. So this is my B offering, just like I have up here. You see my increment here has changed to 2. So I'm now in my second offering, first increment of the discussion. The real change happens when we get into the tertiary and beyond. So if anyone here has courses that have more than 2 instruction types, you're going to see this and need to adjust to this change. So normally our next group of instruction section codes would start at 50. And the ISA does this for you, right? It basically says, okay, well, from 1 to 49 is your second instruction type. 50 to 74 is your second instruction type. 75 to, I think, 89 is your fourth instruction type, sorry. And then 90 to 99 is your fifth instruction type for SIO, the one unit that we had that had 5 instruction types in one course. Instead, because now we're identifying the instruction type within the section code, or maybe within the event code, we no longer need to start the next set at a higher number. Instead, the first lab is going to be the first lab. So this tells me we're in the first offering of Math 18, and this is the first lab, second lab. This is the second offering of Math 18, and this is the first lab. Now it's a change, and all of our brains are going to need to make that adjustment. But it provides a lot more flexibility. We no longer have to think about secondary, tertiary, quaternary components. It's really just what is your primary component, and then your other components each get their own numbering that are unique to them, rather than them having to share one number block like we do in ISIS. Any questions about that change before I move on? All right, great. So I have a bit of a breakdown on how you can think of it. So right, we have subject code hyphen, then leading 0 course number, and then if there's any sort of course number suffix, and then instruction type, offering increment, the typed section increment, right? So that would be the instruction type, and that's how we can break it down. Also, and then if we're doing the shorter version, it's just offering increment, typed section increment, and an instruction type. So feel free to screenshot that. At some point there will be some training materials sent out, I believe, by the TSS team. So hopefully they will also have these sort of translations for you, probably in a much easier to read format than what I have here, because they specialize in that. And I'm just trying to make sure everyone knows how to use the ISA. But that's where those are probably the biggest changes that are going to be the hardest for us to make an adjustment for. So going back to the ISA, you can see all of that being applied. If I switch over here to the quarterly preview, and I go ahead and expand out my sections, you can see a similar sort of thing. So here I've only got one offering of Anthro 2, and then you can see I have my one lecture, and then I have my 6 discussions. You can see how the numbers associate with those. So here I've got 2 offerings of Anthro 21. So first offering, second offering. You can see what the section codes look like for that. So this should be relatively easy. We've designed our copy schedule functionality to convert one direction. So if we allow you to copy from an ISIS term into a TSS term, but we're not permitting you to copy from a TSS term back into an ISIS term. As of right now, there should never be a reason that you need to do that. So we feel that restriction is appropriate. Our work group said that it seemed appropriate as well. So you will be able to copy, if you want to copy your fall 25 into your fall 26, because they're going to look relatively the same, you can do that. We're going to do all this number code, this display code conversion here for you. And then it should basically show up the way that you'd want it to look. Another important change that's happening with TSS is there are now 2 new parts of the section definition. Well, I guess there's 3 changes total. So one, and most of you should be aware of this, an enrollment limit of 0 is now no longer considered a valid enrollment limit. For anyone who's not aware of that, there's some limitations, I believe, on the TSS side, and I don't know exactly what they are, and I'm not going to try to explain them. But basically, enrollment limit 0 being used to require approval before someone can enroll is now instead going to be handled by this waitlist only toggle within the ISA. And that will then indicate effectively that someone can only get enroll in this class onto the wait list, and then there has to be some sort of approval. I don't recall if it's going to be authorization codes or exactly what the plan is, such that they can actually be officially enrolled in the course. So you want to set your enrollment limit for what you expect the total enrollment for the class to be after everyone is added. So if that's going to be, 150 people, set it for 150 people so the appropriate room can be found. The next thing is going to be delivery mode. And I don't believe we have implemented this first, but we are going to set default delivery mode to regular in person. We have what I think are some helpful descriptions here that we worked on with our work group and the registrar. This is just in person, and it requires a day, time, and location. Location could be TBA if you're going to do it in department space, but this is how most people are used to scheduling. I'm going to skip hybrid for now, and I'll come back to it. The next option is live online. What this means is it's a synchronous remote only section. It requires a day and time because it's synchronous, but there is no location allowed because it is remote. And then there's online or online asynchronous. This is remote only. We don't allow a day or time because it's asynchronous. And there is no location allowed either because it is online. So you can define these when you are defining your section. As of today, there is no validation on any of these 3 types. That will be added before you are able to submit to the registrar. We expect that validation to hit somewhere right around the beginning of February, once we have the validation data sources available in TSS. The last one I want to talk about is hybrid. Hybrid means that maybe say your lecture is going to meet Monday, Wednesday in person, Friday remote. That would be a case where you'd use hybrid, where that specific section, so in this case, your lecture section, is going to have a mix of both. And then at the meeting level, and we have not implemented this, so when you go in here to do days and times, if you have hybrid selected, then there will be a modality for each meeting. So what that means is if it's going to be an in-person modality, then you would pick a day and time and a location. If it's going to be a remote modality, then you would pick, um, you pick a day and time, but there would not be a location. We haven't implemented that yet. We will get to that again, probably in the February timeframe. Any questions about enrollment limit 0, wait list only, or delivery mode? Or
I actually
modality?
had a quick question.
Go for it.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just wanted to know, I've heard that there's going to be the functionality in where basically the registration system is going to connect to ISIS. So the only way for us to update enrollment limits would be in the ISA. Is that correct? So like if we were changing rooms or needed to adjust the enrollment limit, that would be done in the ISA?
Correct.
Correct. Okay. Do you know if it will be possible? Sometimes in CSC, we suppress enrollment for certain courses in order to kind of allow a wait list to build up and then authorize students based on their spot in the wait list. Do you know if we'll still have the same ability to like artificially decrease the enrollment limit and then do a wait list management in the same way?
Um, I we should probably have that discussion in our work group to figure out exactly how that would work and whether or not that's something that could or should be controlled through the ISA. We'll also need to talk with the registrar about that as well. Uh,
Okay.
I know that there are some scenarios that we haven't exactly designed around, but the ability to update enrollment limit as a change request from the ISA is something that is going to be offered. When we get to, so we're going to do a change request training in January because for spring, everyone is going to be using the ISA to submit change requests. I'm not going to really get into that right now. The only people who've been in the pilot currently have access to that functionality. We may not even turn that functionality on until the morning that the spring look is released for everyone, just so that folks don't go in and start doing it for prior terms. So we don't want to cause confusion for anyone. Um, but yeah, when we do the remediation for TSS to allow the ISA to work with TSS, we will be adding in the ability to request enrollment limit changes. The specifics of that are still waiting on finalization with the registrar because enrollment limits being able to be managed directly by the units is obviously currently allowed in ISIS. There's not an equivalent within TSS, so the ISA is going to be bridging that gap. But there are some rules that we need to get nailed down with the registrar to make sure that what enrollment limits are allowed to be set for assigned rooms are considered to be within scope of what's allowed by business rules, even though there's not going to be a system restriction.
Okay. So it sounds like I think there's probably some other units here where this affects, but for us, typically in CSC, we only have a few folks who actually have access to the ISA, and then other folks in their areas are managing enrollment separately. So this would also mean that more people would need to have access to this system or are funneling enrollment change request to a single person, which could kind of increase the workload. So yeah, I'm certainly I'm very interested to see how this particular part will be managed because I do think it affects some of the larger departments.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I'm with the School of Biological Sciences. We definitely have a lot of distributed roles as a result of that. Um, yeah, it's really going to be up to the units. I mean, if units want to allow more folks to have the course scheduler role, which allows you to make edits within the ISA, that's totally within each unit's prerogative. And if you want folks to get trained up on that, then that's something that we can provide either through the work group or through me or through training materials. So we're going to work with you to try to make sure it's successful. And we definitely have um, lots of extra training time budgeted within our hours that we are getting funded this year. Is waitlist only the disable flag in TSS? The waitlist only is I bel I have to look at what the equivalent is, Somya. For the delivery mode data validation, will all our classes show all three options to select hybrid, live, or online? So like I said, there's no validation right now on delivery mode, and we will not have any validation for delivery mode until that data source is available from TSS. Um, so that's something that we will have to see what is in the data. If the delivery modes are defined within the module definitions from TSS, then we will be able to have that validation such that an R class, which does not permit regular in person, only permits hybrid, live online, or online, then we would basically anyone who had it set for REG delivery mode would show a validation error. Um, but if those are not defined within the data set, the data that we get from the course modules, then there won't be that validation won't be present. It's just all going to depend on what we have in the validation data. We're not the owners of that data. We're consumers of that data. Can we turn on waitlist only in bulk action? There's not currently a bulk action to set waitlist only at the at in it. There's not currently a bulk action for waitlist only, but that's something that we can definitely talk about in the work group. It's unlikely to be added this year because we are so swamped with TSS changes. So it does mean that those 60 or 80 sections would need to be set. I would have to check with the developers. In fact, we can do a live test right now just to see. Um, it's entirely possible that the clone is going to also clone waitlist only, but let's do a quick check and see if my assumption here is correct. Okay. I'm gonna set this to waitlist only, save it. All right, go back to quarterly preview and throw 10. We also have advanced clone set up. That's basically everything up to the point of submitting to the registrar, or just short of submitting to the registrar, should be fully functional. Let's create 3 clones, do basic clone. All right. Okay. So in cases where you're going to set waitlist only for a bunch of sections, definitely recommend using the clone tool. It will clone everything. It'll clone the waitlist toggle, it'll clone your delivery mode, etc. So that is the workaround for there not being a specific bulk action to go and do it after the fact. So if you've already created the sections, you'd have to go in and set it one by one for now, until we have developer time available to create a bulk action for that, until it gets prioritized by the work group. Any other questions? Did I get everyone's question answered that they had around? Um, oh, how quickly for waitlist only does it go into effect to stop students from enrolling? Um, so we haven't figured out exactly how the waitlist only is going to work um, for change requests. So this is after the look has been released. All of that stuff is still in process, finalizing all of that. But if we have this go in as an enrollment change, which I believe it will go in as an enrollment change, um, So I would consider enrollment changes to be enrollment limit and this waitlist toggle. But folks would have to confirm this with me. The current Envision functionality is when you submit a enrollment limit change request, which would include either an actual change in enrollment limit or a change in the waitlist only toggle, that will process effectively immediately. It may take a minute, it may take 5 minutes, but in all likelihood, it's going to take under a second to process. We're going to basically being going to be talking directly to the TSS integration piece that the ISA is using, and that change should happen, like I said, effectively once you click submit. There, as long as it's within, the boundaries that have been set by the registrar. So, the no more than like 10% over capacity up until I think the end of second week, and then I don't think we can go past that. The rules I'm not sure on. This is why we need to get that part finalized. But the idea is it will be effectively live. Um, yeah, 15th day of instruction. Okay. So that's the plan, and waitlist, I believe, will follow the same model as enrollment limit. Um, in that I don't believe the registrar cares about it other than making sure that rooms are being effectively and optimally used as much as possible. We don't want a 30-person class in a 100-person room, for example. Um, we want a 30-person class in a 30-person room if we can make that happen. All right. All right. So those are the big ones. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the structure language that you can see here. So SM, D, E, and EL. Um, Only because getting you a little bit of a preview on it, I think will help. So an SM, or another way of thinking of it is just module, that's a course. Um, I don't actually remember if D has a specific, natural language equivalent. Somia might be able to pipe up if it does. But that's basically your instruction type. So lecture is a D, discussion is a D, lab is a D. Um, and then E is an event. And that's kind of a one-to-one natural language, but there's this other thing called an EL. Basically, an event is something that actually has meetings. So what's the, yeah. So a lot, anything that's regular in person, hybrid, or live online has meetings. And EL is something that doesn't have meetings. So a fully asynchronous remote class wouldn't have any meetings, would be an example. The only reason that matters is they just have a different prefix at the beginning of their TSS event ID. And there's some other stuff that has to happen there. That hopefully you as department schedulers never have to manage. That's the idea, is that you don't need to manage them if something goes from having events to not having events, say in the, you know, could never happen event of like a pandemic, um, or vice versa. So that's basically what that means. Yes, EL can be converted, yes, into an E. So something without meetings can be converted into something with meetings. Something with meetings could be converted into something without meetings, if there are scenarios where that needs to happen. So again, we can see that, well, in the course definition, this is what the tree would look like, and you can see it represented here. So the lecture part of the tree here has multiple offerings. The discussion part of the tree, again, has multiple offerings. The lab part of the tree has multiple offerings. And then we know which course offering it is based on this and this first number. Yes, event and eventless, exactly. Um, CG is course group, which I believe directly corresponds to, or relatively directly corresponds to, the list of courses that academic unit offers. Although I don't know if there's anyone on here would be able to correct me if I'm wrong on that. So take that with a grain of salt. As I said, I am not a TSS expert by any means. Um, doing my best to make sure I understand what I need to understand for my product to work for all of you. Um, but um, but definitely at the ISA level, understanding if we start talking about modules more than courses, then understanding that's basically just courses. If for whatever reason we start talking about D, what's the D object instead of what's the instruction type, that's what we're talking about. Or oh, what's the E object? That's just the section. We talked about delivery mode. Um, we have some rules here, some initial validation, but we don't have course level validation yet. Um, there's some questions on whether or not there's going to be a percentages here. We're waiting on final rules there. Um, category doesn't matter for the ISA. We don't yet have this defined yet, but we should talk about sessions. Um, I think this is still what the session makeup is going to look, or session makeup is going to look like. So the way to think about this is every course or every module has a single academic calendar that it can schedule onto. So most of the people here, your courses are going to schedule on the UCSD undergrad or UCSD grad academic calendars. And those are super easy. They have a single session. Session is very similar to subterm. So subterm one would kind of be the equivalent of what this is and what this is. Except subterms are gone. Instead, there are sessions. And so within fall or fall term, most folks are gonna be just scheduling into the fall session. If you happen to be School of Medicine, SPPS, PAE, I can't remember who else, you will potentially be scheduling into these health science sessions. Um, and I don't have the best. Actually, I'm gonna switch documents here really fast. Um, so there's a very useful little map here that someone created that I want to reference. Okay. Okay. So this isn't perfect because the summer subterms aren't quite correct. Um, because session one and session two don't overlap for the most part. But this idea of most folks are going to be scheduling into fall, winter, spring. But some units will also be able to schedule into health sciences 1, 2, 3, 4 for each term. And you can kind of see it's based on start dates and end dates. And this is kind of how things look together. And you see basically this is very similar to what we all know as subterms in ISIS. The reason this matters um, in TSS and the ISA is we do need to define sessions. And so if I go back to the annual schedule builder, actually here, it's even easier. If I go to the quarterly preview, you look at my validation here, you can see that I have invalid or missing session. We're gonna consider putting in some sort of automation whenever we have the course data from TSS where we can align it to an academic calendar and align an academic calendar to a session. Because right, that's how the validation works. Every course has a valid academic calendar. A valid academic calendar has one or more sessions that can be scheduled into, but for most units, it's going to be a single session per term. When we have that validation, instead of having to go in and say my term is fall and my session name is fall quarter 2026, instead of having to go and do that for every single class that you copy, because right now that's what you'd have to do to get rid of that validation error. So if I go back to quarterly preview, I'd no longer have a validation error on Nthro 2, but I still have all these other validation errors. We're probably going to just do an automated fix for everyone who's in the units that are not able to schedule into those additional sessions, until we can actually have the validation available and only give you the list of things, the list of sessions that you can schedule in. Obviously our current, so if I go move into production and biosci, don't worry, Matt, I'm not going to change your schedule. Switch to the correct year. So if I go here, other class details, right, we don't have all of those sessions yet because we don't have the list of we don't have the official list of sessions yet. I know that they're defined, but we just don't have them to put in to our database so that you can select from them, which is a problem, which means I would expect everyone after they go and they copy their schedule, now that the ASB is available again for 26-27, to have at least one validation error for every class on their schedule. My recommendation is wait. And if you haven't heard anything from us by, let's say, mid-January, start bugging me, because that means I can go and put some extra pressure on the folks who need to provide us the data source. Okay. Yeah, so I mean, we'll need to talk about the E to EL conversation outside of this meeting. Because there are definitely scenarios where that would be necessary. So we need to figure out a pathway to make that happen from the ISA to TSS. Where it could be possible that where a unit went from having an event or having a section that had meetings to not having meetings anymore. Again, I'm thinking of uh, winter of 2020. And I imagine there were a number of academic units that went from having classes that were regular in person to effectively having some of them become fully asynchronous online. And so there may be scenarios where we need to make that conversion. Okay. So yeah, so that session, one of the things that you probably want to keep an eye on, and this, I, th I think, well, the ISA is going to keep you from having to mess with this at all. However, you may hop into things in TSS that feel a little strange. So in ISIS, we have this naming convention for our terms, right? Fall 26, winter 27, spring 27, right? These are all in a single term or in a single year. However, in TSS, the way if you don't use what's called the descriptive name where it shows the 2026 and 2027, spring 2026 in TSS is what we understand as spring of 27. And that's because spring of 26 in TSS is actually spring of 26-27. So just a heads up. I don't know how much this is going to appear on anything you might see in TSS or some output you see from TSS in some report or anywhere else. We are going to use this anywhere that it matters in the ISA, so that it's really clear. Because I think if we say spring 26-27, everyone's going to understand what that means. But just as a heads up, the way TSS does its numbering is the academic year is the starting academic year. Um, and so, that for someone who's been using ISIS, I mean, I'm sure some of you folks have been around for, more than a decade. I've only been here for 5 years, but even for me, it's like a stretch. You know, the ISIS spring 27 and TSS being spring of 2026 is something that I have to keep an eye on. So I would just make sure um, that you are really keeping an eye on that. Um, if you're looking at any sort of report output, like a Cognos report or, since QueryLink is going to go away, um, like any of the things that you're used to using. And if you start looking at TSS stuff, you may get the actual database info, which is going to look more like this, than the descriptive name, which is what most of the applications I think are going to try to use to make it more clear. But just as a heads up, that these all equal the same thing. Um, all right. So that's really it in terms of ISA changes. Like I said, there's going to be more changes. A good chunk of our validation isn't working yet. We've effectively turned off room validation right now. So if I go and I look like, um, why that one's throwing the validation error. Huh, that shouldn't be a validation error. I thought we had turned off room validation, but I guess we hadn't. Um, okay. You'll probably see room validation errors. Oh wait, this is QA. Let me double check. Um, times here. I'm assuming no one else has done any work in 26, 27 yet, other than BioSci at this point. Okay, well, okay, maybe room validations are turned on, but we don't have a room source, so rooms are going to show up as invalid. I would say don't worry about that. I would also say for now, unless you are in a unit that typically schedules in something other than subterm one, and you know who you are, and if you're not sure, you're probably not one of them. I wouldn't worry about sessions either. If you are from a unit that schedules in subterm two on upward, and I'm not talking about summer, I'm talking about fall, winter, spring, um, you will definitely have some work to do to make sure the appropriate session is selected. Um, and we do not have those sessions available for you yet. Um, I would say hold off. You don't see anything in there by mid-January, ping me. Uh, if we don't have that in place by the time the registrar sends their fall call, which I believe right now is still scheduled for mid-February, um, then something has gone uh, probably fairly and very wrong in something along in our chain of dependencies that we have. So if we are and will be working on that. But yeah, that's it. Any questions? Okay. Well, I'm happy to finish early. I'm also happy to answer other non-TSS related ISA questions. Though I may punt them if we're gonna have a training, or I may punt them until the next office hours. Cool. Well, thank you for joining me. Have a happy December. And you'll definitely hear from us again in January when we give the change request training, which definitely is going to impact everyone. We have our office hours for both summer and spring look change request. And then we start ramping up really for fall scheduling. Happy Monday. May your week go well.